Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
After seeing her husband off on a military assignment, the wife immediately went to the... Today's story has a similar plot. Have a good time. Knocking firmly on the door of the apartment on the 4th floor, I said, "Robert McDonald, this is your wife, the woman you've been with for the last 25 years. I am the mother of your 2 sons and the person who loves you more than my own life. I have always loved you and always will, but I have a story to tell you, and it involves me and someone else. After everything we've meant to each other all these years, you should give me time to explain. I'll be downstairs cooking dinner, waiting. You can eat, and then listen to my story," I said through the tightly closed door. About an hour later, he came down for dinner. I had prepared expensive steaks and opened a nice bottle of Cabernet. We ate, and then I started. I spoke from the bottom of my heart. I didn't lie or hide. Hiding the truth from Rob was over. I met a wonderful person who was there for me when I needed help. First, he helped me intimately when I was in a terrible situation, and then he took care of me and our children when I was left alone, I began. I sat there, saying nothing as Karen told me the whole story, how, after the birth of our 2nd son, she became numb from the waist down, how she met Philip, and how he awakened her intimately. She didn't hide anything. I remembered the night I came to bed and found the book The Joy of Intim that Karen had brought home. She told me she wasn't what she could be as a lover after Oscar was born and wanted to be proactive. Now I know that this book was just a cover for her affair with Philip. What she showed me in bed didn't come from that book, these were the things Philip taught her. She then told me how she brought him into our home, into our bed, on the same day she took me to the airport in 1990. I was then assigned to the USS Eisenhower to participate in Operation Desert Shield, which later became Operation Desert Storm, the war to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein. The only thing that kept me going in the dark was the belief that a loving wife and 2 boys were waiting for me at home. Now, 2 decades later, I've learned that this wasn't true. She didn't even have the decency to wait until I was overseas. Now I knew why Karen and the children spent part of Christmas 1990 in Montreal and the real reason for her periodic trips there. I should have realized sooner, but I trusted her. I also learned why my relationship with my 2 sons had deteriorated. She had apparently silenced them and used them to hide the affair from me. I saw the signs when I returned from Iraq but didn't connect the dots. I may have had what some call confirmation bias. I could never imagine her cheating on me, so I dismissed the idea. Apparently, Karen was right. I had been blind, needing guidance to see through the cracks in our relationship. She continued talking, enjoying recounting her romance with Philip, constantly telling me it had nothing to do with her feelings for me. Although the physical part of their relationship ended many years ago, she still had a strong emotional attachment to him and his family. Her story opened my eyes to many things I'd been wondering about for years. Now everything became crystal clear. As she spoke, I felt my blood pressure rising. Part of me wanted to kill her, but I knew it would only land me in jail. So I listened as if it were some sort of romantic tale in her head. She believed she had done nothing wrong and still considered herself a faithful, loving wife. Finally, she stopped. "Now it's time for us to pick up the pieces and continue our life together," she said. "We can overcome this, just like we've overcome everything else." I looked at her without saying anything. After what I had just heard, there was nothing more to say. "Say something, Rob," she begged. "Please, I still love you. I never stopped loving you." I stood up from the table and pushed my chair back in place. I looked at her for a few moments before speaking. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. "Good night." I went back upstairs to the apartment where I had been staying. "Good night?" she asked, incredulous. "Is that all you can say after I poured my soul out to you?" I stopped and looked at her. "For now," I said. "I have a lot to process." I went back upstairs, closed the door to the apartment, and placed a chair against the doorknob to hold it shut. I sat down on the bed and cried. The life I had known was over. My marriage had been alive for the past 20 years or more, and my wife, the one person I loved more than anyone, expected me to simply accept her years of infidelity. She knocked on the door a little later. "Rob," she asked. "Are you okay? We need to talk, honey." Go away, I said. I finally fell asleep, but it wasn't easy. Then the nightmares started again. The F-14 Tomcat I flew to Riyadh the day before Operation Desert Storm began was sluggish, and I felt like something was wrong. One moment we were flying over 20,000 feet at twice the speed of sound, and the next moment we were without power, falling rapidly. The pilot initiated an engine restart, but nothing happened. He tried again with the same result. I told him to try restarting it again, but still, nothing. Then I had an idea and told him to turn off the fuel and try again. This is crazy, he said. Do it now, I ordered. In real life, the plane restarted, and we barely escaped disaster. The problem turned out to be contaminated fuel, and I found out about it by chance. We fixed the issue, saving many lives in the process. Unfortunately, this didn't happen in my nightmare, and I woke up with a start as soon as the plane hit the water. I wondered if the nightmare had anything to do with Karen. The next day, I woke up early and went to work without speaking to Karen. I was part of a team working on a new jet engine for the military. The university where I worked received an annual grant to develop a next-generation engine for integration into some of the new aircraft being developed. If successful, the new engine could, in theory, propel a plane into orbit. Lisa, one of my assistants, pulled me aside during lunch and started talking to me. Okay, Rob, she said. Spit it out. What's going on with you? I don't know what you're talking about, I replied. Nonsense, Rob, she said decisively. I've worked with you for too long. Something is gnawing at you. What's happening? She caught me, and I knew it. So I told her the whole story. Oh my God, she said when I finished. No wonder you've been like a zombie for the last few weeks. What are you going to do? I shook my head. I don't know, I said. She claims the physical part of the affair ended some time ago, but she still has a strong emotional attachment to him, even though he's dead. Part of me wants to divorce her and move on, but the other part says otherwise. I still love her, despite everything. Damn, I hate this. What would you do if it were me? I asked. I would have kicked her fifth place out the moment she confessed, Lisa said. But it's your decision. You need to get your head out of your fifth place and deal with this. Stop analyzing it like a jet engine and face it. Do you think that's what I'm doing? Analyzing it? I asked. Of course, she said. That's how you always deal with things. But this isn't something you can break down into a series of equations. What are your instincts telling you to do? Once you figure that out, deal with it and move on. She got up and threw away her trash. You can contact me anytime you need, Rob, but do something, quickly. We need you back in the game here. She left, leaving me with my thoughts. Lisa was right, and I knew it. I worked late, mostly to avoid going home. I ate a small piece of the leftover meatloaf I had brought from home and kept thinking about what Karen had told me. Finally, around 11 p.m., I headed home. When I walked in, I saw Karen and Ale sitting on the couch. You're finally home, Karen said. I was busy, I said, heading toward the stairs to my apartment. Ale is staying here with us this week to work on the exhibition, Karen said. She had told me the day before that they were planning an exhibition of Philip's work at one of the major art galleries in the city. The exhibition was supposed to start early next year, and they planned to take it around the world. Whatever, I said. And just so you know, we intend to make my portrait the centerpiece of the exhibition, she added. I stopped and looked at her. What? I asked, incredulous. Not only did you humiliate me with that man while I was at war, with our children in the house no less, but now you're going to rub my nose in it by showing it to the whole world? This is a wonderful piece, Ale said. Your wife is a wonderful woman, isn't she? You should be proud to show it to the world. Proud? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. I could feel my blood pressure rising again. Should I be proud of the fact that my wife was having a night with another man in our bed, with our children just a few meters away in another room? And now I should be proud that she's rubbing my nose in her adultery in front of the whole world? You're crazy. Please, Rob, Karen began. Get away from me. Both of you, I said. You disgust me. Just leave me alone. Please don't be upset, Ale begged as I walked upstairs. I didn't want to listen to them anymore. I closed the door to my apartment, locked it, and placed a chair against the doorknob. The women followed me and tried to talk to me through the door. Rob, Karen begged. Please come out and talk to us. Please. What part of leave me alone don't you understand? I asked. Rob, let us erase the pain and suffering, Ale said. Get the hell out. I shouted, feeling pain in my chest. I heard them leave, silently crying. Cursing was rare for me, and I always tried not to swear in front of Karen, so I knew my outburst had upset her. Too bad, I thought. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath, hoping to ease the pain. After a few minutes, the physical pain subsided a little, but the emotional pain was still there. I lay down on the bed, still in my clothes, and thought about my options. Divorce was my first option, although it was something I didn't want to think about. I knew that New York was a no-fault state, and I also knew that marital assets would be divided equally. I decided that if it came down to it, I would give Karen the house, since it meant nothing to me anymore after what she did with Philip in her bedroom while I was abroad. All the years of work I put into renovating this place were in vain, gone. But I had to make Karen understand what she did to me. In her head, she felt completely justified and showed no guilt for cheating with Philip. Then it dawned on me, I still had my old pump shotgun in the back of the closet. I found it, still in its case, untouched for over 10 years. I pulled it out along with a box of cartridges. It was still slippery from the last time I lubricated it. I tested the pump action, and it still worked well. I sat down and thought about my next move. For a moment, I actually considered shooting myself in the head. In my mind, I was already a dead man walking, thanks to Karen. I dismissed the thought because I had always considered suicide to be a cowardly act. I could, of course, shoot Karen, but that would only put me behind bars, and I didn't want to end up as someone's punching bag in prison. Then it hit me, the painting. The same one Karen and Ale loved so much, a portrait drawn by that idiot, the one who seduced Karen with his smooth, seductive ways. Karen had wisely tucked it away in the back closet, but it was still there, mocking me. Now, she was going to make me a laughingstock in front of the whole world with that portrait. This would be my target. I loaded the shotgun and listened to make sure the two women were asleep. Hearing nothing, I quietly went downstairs and headed to the back closet. I opened the door and saw the painting, leaning against the back wall, covered with a blanket. I lifted the blanket and looked at it one last time. Yes, Karen was beautiful in that portrait, I thought, just as I had told Ale when she first showed it to me, a beautiful woman of easy virtue. But it was clear that her smile was meant for her lover, not for me. My anger rose, as did my blood pressure. I chambered the first cartridge, took aim, and fired straight into her face. I kept pumping and firing, destroying her image piece by piece. By the time the cartridges ran out, her image had completely disappeared from the painting. I threw the empty shotgun on the floor and began tearing the painting apart with my hands and feet, despite the pain in my chest. I gathered the pieces and headed for the large gas fireplace in the front room. Karen and Ale followed me, yelling for me to stop, crying and begging. I threw the torn painting into the fireplace and turned it on. The canvas immediately caught fire, and I stood back to admire my work. I took off my wedding ring and threw it into the flames, but it bounced off the brick and landed somewhere in the living room. I didn't care. I turned to the women, who were sobbing inconsolably, but their cries didn't reach my ears. I wanted to say, now you know how I feel, but I didn't have time to finish the thought. My vision blurred, and pain shot through my left arm. I felt nauseous and struggled to breathe. Falling to the floor, I silently prayed for death to take me away from this hell. I woke up to see a man in a doctor's coat standing over me with a clipboard in his hands. He smiled. "Mr. McDonald, glad to see you conscious," he said. "We almost lost you several times." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, and my lips felt stuck together. My chest hurt terribly. "Everything's all right," said the doctor. "Just relax. Don't try to talk." He waved to someone out of my sight, and I fell asleep again. I woke up later to see a nurse in my room. I got her attention and tried to explain that my mouth was dry. She gave me a piece of ice to suck on, and I was finally able to speak. My chest hurts terribly, I said. She nodded, understanding. It's all right, Mr. McDonald, she said. They had to give you CPR, so your chest will hurt for a while. She gave me another piece of ice, and I savored it for as long as I could. She added something to my fore, and I started dozing off again. When I woke up again, the doctor was in my room, checking my vitals. Karen and Ale were also there, sitting on the couch under the window that overlooked the city. The doctor finished his examination before speaking. How are you feeling, Mr. McDonald? He asked. My chest hurts like hell, I replied, sucking on another piece of ice to moisten my mouth. The doctor nodded. That's normal, he said. The paramedics performed CPR and used a defibrillator several times. Your chest may hurt for a while. He checked my blood pressure and pulse before sitting down next to me. How are you doing, really? He asked. What do you have in mind? I asked. Well, for starters, we didn't find any signs of blockage, he said, but we did notice that your heart has changed shape. He placed the X-ray on the viewing screen in the room and then placed another next to it. Pointing to the second image, he continued, this is an X-ray of a normal heart, and this is yours, he added, gesturing to the first one. I had to admit they looked completely different. Mine resembled a kind of vessel lying on its side, with one side seemingly sticking out. I've read about it, and to be honest, I've only seen it in a couple of other patients, he said. This is called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or weakening of the main chamber of the heart, which usually occurs as a result of severe emotional or physical stress. It's also known as broken heart syndrome. Tell me, Mr. McDonald, has anything extremely stressful happened in your life recently? Perhaps the loss of a loved one? Karen started crying when the doctor said this. He glanced at her for a moment, then looked back at me. Perhaps we should invite one of our consultants to talk to you, he suggested. Will he be okay, doctor? Karen asked through her tears. With the right treatment, I think so, Mrs. McDonald, the doctor replied. However, his recovery may take several months. We've put him on some medications, beta blockers and aspirin, and we'll see how he responds. We'll know more when the consultant talks to him. In the meantime, I suggest doing everything possible to reduce his stress levels. Thank you, doctor, she said as he left the room. After he was gone, Karen and Ale came to my bedside. I looked at Karen before speaking. Why? I wheezed. I already told you why. I fell in love with Philip, she said. I shook my head and waved my hand dismissively. No, I said, why did you let me live? Her face turned pale. You already killed me. You should have just let me die. Both women began to cry again. Please, just leave, I said. You've hurt me enough. Please don't say that, Rob, Karen said through her tears. Don't you know how much I love you? I'll die without you. I'll be back, Rob, and I promise I'll fix this. Please don't hate me. At that moment, a nurse entered the room, accompanied by another woman in a medical gown. The nurse led Karen and Ale out, closing the door behind them and leaving me alone with the other woman. She rolled a chair to my bedside and sat down. My name is June, Mr. McDonald, she said. Dr. June Carstairs. I've been asked to come and talk to you to find out what might be causing your heart problem. Do you mind if I record our conversation? Not at all, I replied. Thank you, she said, starting the recording with an introduction. Please, tell me about yourself. I gave her a brief account of my life and my work at the university. So, stress is a normal part of your job, she said. I understand. What about your home life? I told her everything, how Ale came with the portrait and threw what was essentially a nuclear bomb into what I thought was a relatively good marriage. I also explained, as best I could, what Karen had told me about her relationship with Philip Dumont. She listened calmly, taking notes, and occasionally asked clarifying questions. I also shared how Karen planned to rub my nose in her affair with the portrait, which led to the shotgun incident. So that's what triggered it, she asked. I nodded. Yes. I see, she replied, asking a few more questions and writing down my answers. "I'll need to speak with your wife before I make my report with recommendations to Dr. T. Allen," she added. "In the meantime, you need to rest. If you feel the need to talk, just call one of the nurses, okay?" I nodded again. "Thank you," I said, feeling exhausted. I fell asleep after she left. The next day, Dr. Allen said that I could be transferred from intensive care to a private ward. The nurses and aides did their thing, and soon I was lying in a real bed in a small but cozy room. It was nice to be out of the ICU, and I was finally able to relax. I didn't see Karen or Ale that day, but Lisa and some other colleagues from the university came to visit. Lisa brought me a paper airplane, thinking it would cheer me up. I smiled at the gesture, even though I've always hated airplanes. Well, I told myself, it's the thought that counts. After eating a black bean burger, the hospital insisted I strictly follow their cardiac diet. I watched some silent TV and dozed off. Karen's thoughts were a blur as 3 days had already passed since Rob's heart attack. Ale and I had just fallen asleep when we heard the first shotgun blast downstairs. The security system didn't work, so I feared Rob had decided to kill himself. One shot followed another, then a third, and a fourth. What is Rob doing? I asked myself. Ale and I ran downstairs and saw him in the back closet. He was shooting at my portrait. We both screamed for him to stop, but he ignored us and continued firing. Holding our ears, we watched as he systematically destroyed my without clothes image in the painting. When the cartridges ran out, he threw the shotgun on the floor and began tearing at the frame, ripping it apart with his hands and feet. When he finished, he gathered the pieces and ran into the front room. We followed him, begging him to stop, but he seemed possessed. We watched in horror as he threw the pieces into the fireplace and turned it on. We cried inconsolably as the beautiful portrait Philip had created turned to ashes. Rob then took off his wedding ring and hurled it into the fireplace. I saw it bounce off the brickwork and land somewhere in the living room. I made a mental note of where it fell so I could find it later. He turned towards us, looking like he was about to say something, but then he collapsed, unconscious. I quickly grabbed my phone to dial 911 while Ale tried to turn off the fireplace, but it was too late. The portrait was completely destroyed. The paramedics arrived swiftly, and we watched as they performed CPR and loaded him onto a stretcher. They told me which hospital they were taking him to, and then they left. Ale and I quickly dressed and rushed to the emergency room. We were told Rob had suffered some kind of heart attack and that the doctors were working on him. We waited for what felt like an eternity until the doctor came out to speak with us. "Mrs. McDonald?" he asked. I nodded, and he led me to a small room near the waiting area. "Your husband has cardiomyopathy. We almost lost him several times, but we were able to revive him. He's been transferred to the cardiac intensive care unit. Once his condition stabilizes, the nurse will call you." "Will he be okay?" I asked. "We're doing everything we can for him," the doctor said. I sat down and cried. Had I really done this to him? Had I pushed him too hard, expecting him to accept more than he could handle? I had never seen Rob act aggressively before, and I certainly hadn't thought he was capable of something like shooting at my portrait. Ale held me, silently offering support. Several hours passed before a nurse came out and escorted us to the intensive care unit. As I looked at everyone around me, I felt like they all knew my betrayal had put Rob in the hospital. Nobody said anything, but their accusing glances burned my soul. I almost lost my composure when I saw him for the first time. He looked 10 years older, his eyes sunken, his skin a sickly gray tint. We sat by his side, watching the monitors, hoping for some sign that he was still with us. Nurses came in periodically to check his vital signs and adjust his medications. We dozed off a few times, and one of the nurses suggested we leave and come back in a few hours, but I refused. I wasn't going to leave my husband when he needed me most, not again. Ale and I took turns, one of us sleeping while the other kept watch. We stayed there for about 30 hours when Drive D. Allen came in with a nurse. He spoke with Rob briefly before putting a couple of x-rays on the screen. He explained that Rob had Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, a condition named after a pot Japanese fishermen used to catch octopuses. This condition is brought on by severe emotional tension or stress. I felt like I was dying when Dr. Allen asked if anything extremely stressful had happened recently. I burst into tears when he asked Rob if he had lost someone close to him. Yes, I thought. It's me. I did this to him. Ale held me while I cried. I asked the doctor if Rob would be okay, and he said that with proper treatment and stress reduction, Rob should recover, though it could take months. He also said he would bring in a consultant to talk to Rob. I thought this was a good idea. Maybe a counselor could help Rob overcome his feelings. I thanked the doctor when he left. Ale and I went to Rob's side again. When I looked at his face, I saw a sadness I had never seen before. I was surprised when he asked me, why? I thought he wanted to know why I fell in love with Philip, but he shook his head and waved his hand. No, he said. Why did you let me live? I was shocked to my core. You already killed me. You should have just let me die, he said. We both started crying again. Please, just go away, he said. You've hurt me enough. Please don't say that, Rob, I said through my tears. Don't you know how much I love you? I'll die without you. I'll be back, Rob, and I promise I'll fix this. Please don't hate me. I meant every word, but I wondered how I could possibly make it up to him. How could I make him understand how much I needed him? For the first time, I truly began to realize the devastation my affair with Philip had caused, and I felt terrible. My God, I thought, I did this to him. The nurse returned with another woman in scrubs, and they escorted Ale and me out of the room, asking us to come back the next day. I was too shaken to drive, so Ale drove us home. We showered, ate, and collapsed into bed, both physically and emotionally exhausted. Ale was so sweet, so supportive. I truly felt blessed to have her in my life at that moment. We lay in each other's arms and fell asleep. I dreamed I was standing in a circle of light. I looked around but didn't see anyone. Then, several large heads appeared in my field of vision. I recognized them from the photographs Rob had shown me. They were members of his family. I saw his father, his mother, and some other relatives. They all looked at me with anger and condemnation. His father's face spoke. You killed him, Karen, it said. I shook my head. No, I said. You don't understand. What I had with Philip was wonderful. No, said the father's face. You broke his heart. He loved you with all his being, and he trusted you. And what did you do? Please, I begged. I needed Philip. You don't understand. I understand all too well, said the father's face. Your husband almost died in this war, but that wasn't enough for you, was it? You schemed, you cheated, and you deliberately shattered his heart. You brought this man into his house, into his bed. You turned his children against him. You destroyed everything he held dear. You killed him. No, I sobbed, crying. Please try to understand. You are guilty, the father's face declared, staring at me with fury. Guilty, the other faces echoed in unison. Guilty, guilty. I woke up terrified, and saw Elle lying next to me, her eyes open. Shoo, she whispered, holding me tightly. It was just a nightmare. It wasn't real. Go back to sleep. She held me as I cried and eventually drifted back to sleep. But no matter what she or anyone else said, deep down in my heart, I knew those faces were right. I was guilty, and a good man had almost died because of me. The next morning, I got up, showered, dressed, and went downstairs. Ale was already awake, making breakfast. I poured myself a cup of coffee and ate absent-mindedly. We talked about the exhibition, but my heart wasn't in it. All I could think about was the look on Rob's face the day before. Your portrait is destroyed, Ale said. It was supposed to be the centerpiece of our exhibition. What will we do now? I don't know, I said, shaking my head. We'll figure something out. Fortunately, our conversation was interrupted by a phone call. It was Dr. Phone Carstairs, and she wanted to talk to me that morning about the events leading to Rob's heart attack. We need to get back to the hospital, I told Ale after the call ended. Why? She asked. They want to talk to me about what happened, I said, heading upstairs to change clothes. An hour later, we arrived at the hospital and made our way to Dr. Carstairs' office. She asked to speak with me alone first, so Ale stayed in the waiting room. "I want to discuss the events that led to your husband's incident," Dr. Carstairs said after closing the door. "Do you mind if I record our interview?" I shook my head, watching as she pulled out a digital recorder and took notes. When she was ready, she looked at me. "Please," she said, "start from the very beginning." I told her everything, just as I had told Rob the day before, how I met Philip and how he awakened my intimacy. I explained how I had brought Philip into our house the day Rob went off to war, leaving nothing hidden. I even told her about the events surrounding the painting that Rob had destroyed and how I had periodically traveled to Montreal to see my lover. I also confessed how I had enlisted the children to help keep my affair with Philip a secret from their father. Dr. Carstairs was very professional, taking notes as I spoke. She could have been a poker player. She showed no emotion, never indicating whether she approved or disapproved of my actions. She didn't say a word until I had finished. "So, do you feel any remorse or guilt for your actions?" she asked. "At first, no," I admitted. I am a good wife and mother." "I see," she said, making a note on her pad. "And how did you expect your husband to react to your affair?" "I hoped he could forget about it," I said. "I thought that after the new year, we could go to counseling, and over time he would move on. Philip is dead, after all." "Just so I understand," she said, "you engaged in a long-term physical and emotional affair with another man, brought that man into your marital bed while your husband was overseas fighting, and you expected your husband to simply shrug it off and act as if nothing had happened, right?" The way she put it sounded so harsh, but it was accurate. What more could I say? "Well," I began, "that's basically how I imagined it." "Has your husband ever been violent before?" the doctor asked. I shook my head. "No, never. Rob is somewhat shy and introverted. He tends to keep everything to himself until he's fully processed it. I've never seen him lose his composure." "You mentioned the beginning of the year," the doctor said. "Why wait for counseling until then? Is there something special about the new year?" "Ale, Damon, Philip's wife, and I are preparing an exhibition of his works," I said. The portrait that Rob destroyed was supposed to be the centerpiece of this exhibition. I thought we could forget about the past before the exhibition ended. "I see," Dr. Carstairs said. "And you intended to display the portrait, which symbolizes your betrayal, to the whole world, correct?" "Mostly," I admitted, feeling ashamed. She said, jotting something down. "How would you describe your husband's relationship with your children?" "I think it's like most fathers and sons," I said. "They're a bit distant now. Rob doesn't talk to them much." "Did you encourage them to keep your affair a secret?" the doctor asked. "Yes," I whispered. "And you didn't think that might affect their relationship?" "I didn't think it would have such an impact at the time," I said. "And now?" the doctor asked. The doctor asked, "One more question, Mrs. McDonald. If you could go back, what would you do differently?" "Honestly," I replied, "I don't know. I think, under the same circumstances, I probably would have done the same thing." "Even knowing what it would do to your husband?" she asked. I had to think about that. "You must have known Philip," I said. "I see," she replied. "So, will my husband be okay?" I asked. "You need to talk to his doctor," she said. "Can I go see him now?" I asked. She shrugged. "Of course, if you really want to," she said. I quickly answered that I did, and I left her office, feeling her gaze burning into my back as I walked away. I grabbed Ale, and we went to Rob's room. After a normal night's sleep, I woke up and saw one of the hospital staff carrying my breakfast. I ate it, and soon after, a nurse came to take my vital signs and escort me to my daily x-ray check. After returning to the room, another nurse came by to help me walk around the ward. The doctor had instructed me to walk around at least twice a day to regain strength. When I got back to my room, I settled back into bed just as Karen and Ale arrived. "How do you feel?" Karen asked, approaching my bed. "Not as bad as yesterday," I replied. "You look better than yesterday," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "That's good, I guess," I said. Of course, that's good, she replied. I need you to come home as soon as possible. I miss you, you know. I'm sure, I answered in a neutral tone. She looked at me, surprised. It's true, she said. I love you and miss you. I know you probably don't believe me, but it's the truth. You're right, I said. I don't trust you, but I appreciate the sentiment. Ale came over to my bed, angry. How can you talk to your wife like that, she said. She cried all night because of you. Because of me? I asked. Please don't insult my intelligence. I would never do such a thing, Ale said. But I do have to wonder, why did you destroy such a beautiful painting? Do you mean that picture? I asked. Of course, she answered. It wasn't a work of art, I said. It was just a picture of a beautiful woman of easy virtue, painted by her lover as a constant reminder of her betrayal. A true work of art was what Karen and I had before she met your husband. They both destroyed that masterpiece, and I understand you helped. As did my 2 sons. Please don't talk about your wife like that, Ale said, as Karen wiped her eyes. Look at her. She still loves you. Can't you put aside your pride and let her love you? You don't understand, Mrs. Chaudumont, I said, deliberately using her married name. A successful marriage requires more than just love. It requires loyalty, devotion, and trust. Karen and I swore an oath before God and everyone to be faithful until death. I kept my end of the deal. She didn't. Worse, she lied to me for 20 years. That may mean nothing to you, but it means everything to me. And Karen knew that when she lay with your husband. You make it all sound so depraved, Ale said. Because it was depraved, I replied. Can't you forgive your wife's mistake? She asked. A mistake? I repeated. A mistake is accidentally leaving the milk out overnight or turning right instead of left. What she did went far beyond a simple mistake. She betrayed me in the worst possible way. She turned our marriage into a mockery, then lied to me for 20 years to cover it up, and got our children involved. Besides, she doesn't even think she did anything wrong. How can I forgive someone who thinks they're as pure as the first snow? I turned my attention to Karen. Tell me something, dear wife, I said. What would you do if the roles were reversed? Let's say you came home one day and found someone you'd never met on her doorstep, holding a portrait of a without anything woman, only to discover I'd been sleeping with her for 20 years. Would you just forget about it and expect us to carry on as if nothing had happened? Honestly, Rob, she said, I don't think I could ever forgive you for that. But that's exactly what you want from me, I said. Let's move on. What if I told you that I wanted to display this portrait to audiences around the world to showcase the woman I'd cheated on you with? Would you accept that? No, of course not, she replied. And what if I involved the boys in this, asking them to keep the betrayal a secret from you? Would you agree with that? Hell no, she said. And finally, I continued, what if this woman's family came to you and tried to convince you that it was wonderful I'd found this amazing woman who helped me through a tough time, and told you to just suck it up and accept it? Could you do that? No, Rob, she replied quietly. I couldn't. But that's exactly what you expect from me, I said. So, to sum it up, there's one set of rules for you, but a different set for me. Isn't that true? Please, Karen, be honest with me, if you can. Okay, Rob, Karen said, her irritation showing. You've made your point. Is there any way for us to move forward at all? I honestly don't know, Karen, I replied. Can you undo the last 20 years? Can you prove to me that I can trust or believe in you again? She didn't have time to answer the question because there was a knock on the door. Hello, a male voice called out. Can I come in? Come in, I said. Admiral Dan Dickerson peered through the door before entering. The last time I saw him was in 1992, when the USS Eisenhower was heading to Norfolk for repairs. With him were 2 junior officers, Commander Jack Marlowe and Lieutenant Allison Patrick. Something told me that these people were as military as our house cat, but I didn't say anything. Long time no see, Dan, I said, shaking his hand. You look good. What brings you here? We stopped by to see how the project was going and, of course, to check on your condition, he replied. How are you now? I've been better, I answered. By the way, let me introduce you to my wife Karen and Ale DeMonte. Everyone shook hands and chatted quietly while Dan entertained the women with stories from my time on the Eisenhower. Although I enjoyed the visit, I suspected there was an ulterior motive. I appreciate your visit, Dan, I said, but I have a feeling something else is going on. There's a problem, actually, Professor, Lieutenant Patrick said, glancing at the two women in the room. Could you please explain? I asked. Of course, Lieutenant Patrick replied. We've become aware of a potential security threat that could jeopardize the project. She turned to Karen. For example, your wife had a long-term affair with a foreign citizen who has a reputation as a ladies' man. She then looked at Ale before continuing. And by the way, he was married to a committed communist. This is the kind of scandal a hostile foreign power could use to blackmail the head of a project like yours. Karen and Ale lowered their heads. You're not hinting. I began, but Dan raised his hand. Nobody's hinting, Rob, he said. I know you. I know what kind of person you are. But it's the type of thing that gets people talking. Next thing you know, Congress is calling for investigations, and, well, you know what could happen next. Normally, we would have suspended the project until a full risk assessment was completed, Commander Marlowe added. Which, of course, would include a full psychological examination of the team leader, who just suffered a serious medical incident related to his marriage. I knew what that meant. But that could take months, I said, looking at Dan. I know, he replied. That's the other reason we came today. We stopped by the research facility to check things out, and as far as the Pentagon is concerned, you and your team met your contract goals ahead of schedule and within budget. Don't worry, you and your team will be paid in full. Consider it an early Christmas gift. I understood what it meant. The project was no longer in my hands. It would be completed by military engineers. Lisa, the rest of the team, and I were officially out of work, another casualty of Karen's betrayal. I see, I said. I suppose you'll need my laptop and access card. Yes, that's true, Dan replied. You can pick them up at home anytime, I said. Karen knows where I keep my laptop bag. Dan looked at Karen. We'll be home later this afternoon, she said. You can come by any time. Thank you, Mrs. McDonald, I appreciate it. Dan turned to me. Rob, you did a great job, as always. I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon. Get well, okay? I'll be fine, Dan. Thanks, I said. They left after shaking hands and saying their goodbyes. I waited until the door closed before speaking. Well, Karen, I said, is there anything else you want to ruin? Rob, I'm so sorry, she said. I had no idea something like this could happen. I hope you understand that if it had been anyone other than Dan, this incident could have turned into a national scandal, I said. A lot of people have lost their jobs because of this. Karen looked like she was about to say something, but there was another knock on the door. For a moment, the Old Men at Work song Who Can It Be Now popped into my head. Dr. Allen peered through the door before entering. How are you feeling today, Mr. McDonald? He asked. Better than yesterday, Doctor. Thank you, I said. Good, he replied. I just wanted to let you know that your tests show improvement, and if everything continues to go well, we'll discharge you in a day or two. So, he'll be coming home? Karen asked. I'm afraid not, Dr. Allen replied. I've reviewed Dr. Carstairs' report and agree with her assessment that Mr. McDonald needs rehabilitation in a stress-free environment. Everything has already been arranged, we're just waiting for a room to become available. How long will that take? Karen asked. It's hard to say, Dr. Allen replied. At least a month, but it all depends on how his body responds to therapy. The most important part of his recovery is keeping his stress levels low. I hope you understand. I understand, she said quietly. Dr. Allen said his goodbyes and left. Karen came up to me. Rob, do you think we'll ever be okay? She asked. I don't know, Karen, I answered. There's too much damage, and I keep wondering what's going to happen next. You'd be a fool to reject your wife's love, Ale started to say, but Karen raised her hand to stop her. Leave him be, she said. You heard the doctor. He needs to keep his stress levels low. I know my Rob, he'll analyze it like everything else, and he'll make the right decision. I hope you're right, Ale said. Karen kissed me on the cheek. We'll be back, she said. For a moment, I imagined the Terminator making the same statement, and I smiled to myself, nodding my head. I'll be here, I said. Do me a favor and bring my laptop when they're done with it, please. I'll bring it, she replied. They left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Karen was right about one thing. I will analyze everything carefully, but I had already decided what the end result would be. About an hour later, Lisa came into my room to update me on the day's events. I take it you've heard about the project? She asked. I heard, I replied. What happened? Well, the Admiral and his 2 assistants showed up just as we were about to launch, she said. They wanted to know if we could start the engine. As it turned out, we could, and we launched it. Believe it or not, it fired right up, and before we knew it, we were hitting over 990,000 pounds of thrust. It used a little more fuel than we'd like, but they said it wasn't a problem. Then they thanked us for our work, said we had done a good job, and announced that their engineers would take over everything. They collected our passes, erased our laptops, and left. They didn't say anything else? I asked. She shook her head. No, she said, but I had a feeling something else was going on. There is, I said. Karen, she asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. We dodged a bullet, you know. If anyone other than Admiral Dickerson had been involved, we would have had to answer a lot of awkward questions from some very curious members of Congress, and we might have lost our clearance to access classified information. I'm sorry you and the others lost your jobs. Don't worry about it, boss, she said. This had to end sooner or later. Have you decided what you're going to do about Karen? She asked. I've decided, I said. I just need more information about this Dumont. I keep thinking there's more to this than I've been told so far. Just don't overanalyze it, Rob, she said. It's not an engine, you know. Do what you need to do and move on. Good advice, I said. She stood up to leave. You know, Rob, she said, if I ever decided to switch sides, you'd be the man I'd want to latch onto. Everyone in the group knew that Lisa preferred women to men. Thank you, Lisa, I said. That means a lot to me. Thanks for the support. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. You're welcome, she said. I hope one day we can work together again. Me too, I said. I watched her go, then lay back on the bed. I was almost asleep when the nurse came in with my evening medication and to help me take a short walk. When I returned, my dinner had already been delivered. By the time I finished, Karen returned with my laptop. Here's your laptop, she said. They got everything they needed from it. Thank you, I said, placing it on the tray. Rob, she said quietly. I looked at her. Are you really going to throw away 26 years of marriage? That's the problem, I said. I'm not sure we've been a couple for the last 20 years or so. From my point of view, you were Philip's de facto wife all that time. I was in the house with you, and we were officially married, but he had your heart the whole time. And he still has it. I just don't understand one thing, I added. What? She asked. You've shown no remorse for what you did, I said. And you describe this romance as something beautiful and innocent. If it was as great and pure as you say, why did you feel the need to hide it from me all these years? I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. So you admit it would hurt me? Interesting. But you should have known I would find out, one way or another. I was hoping this wouldn't happen for many years, she said. Tell me something, I said. What? She asked. When you were with him, did you ever wish you were with me? I asked. I always hoped all 3 of us could be together, she said. But you never wished for me to be there instead? I asked. She lowered her head, then shook it. No, she said quietly. And when you were with me, I guess he was on your mind?" I asked. She nodded without saying a word. "I see," I said. "In other words, he took my place in your heart." I noticed something else. "You and Ale seem very close. What's going on between you two?" She smiled and nodded. "We've become very close," she said quietly, emphasizing the word very. This explained a lot. Not only had she cheated on me with Philip, but she was now involved with Ale. "In fact, we were hoping you'd join us at some point," she added. "And the blows keep coming," I said. "How long?" "Quite a while," she said. "She really gravitates toward you, you know. Don't you find her attractive?" "I do," I said. "But there's just one problem." I lifted my hand, showing the imprint of my missing wedding ring. "I'm still a little married. And as you know, I'm extremely monogamous." "I know." "Look, Rob, I'm really sorry I hurt you," she said. "I never wanted this." I nodded. "I'm starting to get tired," I said. She took the hint and stood up to leave. "Please believe me when I say I love you," she said, kissing my cheek. I nodded again without saying a word. She left the room, wiping her eyes. The next day, I was transferred to the rehabilitation department of the hospital. My new room was much larger than the one I had before and came with more amenities. For starters, the bed was bigger and more comfortable. There was a small refrigerator and a huge TV mounted on the wall. The facility also had excellent Wi-Fi, so I could use my laptop. I was put on a strict diet and exercise routine designed to restore my body. When I wasn't training, walking, or consulting, I was on my laptop researching Philippe Dumont. I could understand why Karen's affair with him was seen as a potential security threat. Philippe was quite the ladies' man, responsible for at least 6 divorces over the past 25 years. One of his victims was a high-ranking Canadian Army official. Several articles on the internet included photographs of Philippe with 5 women at the same time, all of whom were referred to as his companions. Some of the photos were of Karen, wearing outfits I had never seen her in before. Interestingly, some articles even called her his married American companion. She looked so alive and happy in those photos, clearly not caring what anyone thought. As you might imagine, some of the comments on these articles weren't too kind. One read, "You mean married American woman of easy virtue? Fixed for you. Does her husband know about this?" I was almost tempted to respond, but decided not to. A couple of weeks after arriving at the rehab facility, I received a call from a friend, Kirk Ward, who worked for a company in Cincinnati. His company had worked extensively with General Electric, designing and building engines for military and commercial aircraft. He mentioned they were looking for an engineer for new projects. The only downside was that I'd have to move to Cincinnati. I hated leaving Albany, but I didn't see a future for myself here. Kirk said they'd expect me right after New Year's if I was available. I decided to accept his offer. Damn it, I thought. I don't have a job here, and I certainly don't have a marriage, so there's nothing holding me back. I hadn't seen Karen or Ale much since arriving, which was fine by me. The doctor had made it clear that I needed to be stress-free, and since Karen's actions had landed me in the hospital, they were told to stay away. I'd only seen them a couple of times, and that was enough. I started researching divorce laws and decided to move forward with it, but I wanted to find a good lawyer to protect my assets. I met with a couple of attorneys who came to see me at the rehab center, and I was impressed with both. After checking them out and seeing their strong recommendations, I just had to choose which one to hire. At the end of September, Karen and Ale came to visit me and told me that Ale's family, along with Karen's extended family, would be coming in October to celebrate Canadian Thanksgiving. "We'd like you to come and be with us," Karen said. "For what?" I asked. "This is your family, not mine." "The boys will be there too," Karen added. I hadn't seen my sons in a while, so I told her I'd talk to the staff and see if it could be arranged. "We can come get you if you want," Karen offered. I shook my head. "No, I'll take a taxi if I go." "When will it be?" I asked. "The second Monday in October," Karen said. "We'll have turkey and stuffing and everything. Don't you want a good turkey dinner?" It sounded tempting, but I had another idea. Sounds good, I said. Dinner will be at 18:30, so we'll be waiting for you, she said. After they left, I spoke with the doctor responsible for my rehabilitation and received permission to attend, provided I returned that evening. I then called the lawyer I had chosen for my divorce and told him about it. Do you want her served at 6:30 p.m. on the second Monday in October? Ron, my lawyer, asked. Exactly, I said. We can arrange that, he said. Just curious, why that particular date and time? I explained, and he chuckled a little. Revenge, huh? He asked. Understandable. Consider it done. I thanked him and ended the call. When the date arrived, I took a taxi and went to the house. I no longer considered it my home. In my mind, it was Karen's. I rang the doorbell, and a puzzled Karen answered. Why are you ringing the doorbell? She asked. This is still your home. I didn't mean to be rude, I said. She took me inside and introduced me to everyone. The house was filled with grandmothers, children, aunts, uncles, everyone. For a moment, I was glad I wouldn't be staying overnight. I barely spoke to Aile's family members, just enough to avoid seeming rude. Honestly, I felt like an insect being observed under a microscope. I noticed my two sons and approached them. Good evening, Oscar, I said, shaking his hand. I'm glad to see you. Who's this with you? I asked, looking at the young man standing beside him. This is Mark, Oscar said. Mark, this is my father, Robert McDonald, he added, turning to Mark. Please call me Rob, I said, shaking his hand. I noticed that Oscar seemed a little nervous. Nice to meet you, I said. Tell me, are you two dating? I asked. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. It was obvious there was chemistry between these two young men. Mark and Oscar looked down for a moment. It's okay, I told them. I only care about my children being happy. Treat my son right, okay? They looked at me, clearly surprised by my frankness. Mark smiled and nodded. I will, Rob, he said. I promise. I hugged Oscar tightly and patted him on the back. I love you, son, I said. Despite everything, never forget that. He smiled at me. Thank you, Dad, he said. I love you too. I turned to my eldest son, Kevin, who was with a charming girl. When I looked at him, I realized he would have been about 6 years old when Karen moved Philippe into our house and into my bed. How are you? I asked. He smiled and shook my hand. Great, Dad, he said. I'm glad to see you. I looked at my watch. There are about 20 minutes left before the show. Are you waiting for someone? Kevin asked, his eyes widening as he realized. Are you going to give Mom the divorce papers? I nodded. Yes, I said. Listen, I know you two kept your mother's secret for 20 years. I don't like it, but I understand. I'm only asking for 20 minutes. But here, in front of the whole family, he asked. I hardly know these people, I said. They may be your mother's extended family, but they are not mine. But Dad, we're part of their family too, he said. They accepted us, and we got to know them well. I understand, I said. Only 20 minutes. That's all I ask. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang as everyone began to sit down at the table. I looked at Karen. I think this is for you, I said. She looked at me puzzled, then walked toward the door. She opened it and saw a man in khaki and a light jacket. Mrs. Karen McDonald, he asked. Yes, it's me, she said. He handed her a manila envelope and asked her to sign it. She signed where he indicated, then looked at him again. You have been served with papers, ma'am, he said. Have a good day. Karen looked into the envelope and immediately began to sob. By this time, everyone had gathered in the living room. How dare you humiliate your wife like that on Thanksgiving Day, on top of everything else, and in front of the whole family? Aile said, shocked. Everyone else looked at me, puzzled. None of them expected this. How dare I humiliate her? I asked sarcastically. No, how dare she humiliate me the way she has for the last 20 years? Do you think this is humiliation? Try walking in my shoes for the last few weeks. What about the humiliation of learning that my wife of over 2 decades had slept with another man and his wife? What about the humiliation they were planning by exposing her betrayal to the whole world? I stopped to catch my breath as I felt my blood pressure begin to rise. Because of what she did to you and your husband, I lost my family, I said. I lost my masculinity, my dignity, my job. I almost lost my life. My whole life for the last 20 years has been a damn lie. And do you know what's the worst thing about all this? Everyone in this house, except me and a couple of other people, knew about it, and not one of you raised a finger to stop it or let me know. I stopped to take another breath. By this point, everyone was silent. You could hear a pin drop in the house. And what do you really know about your one true love, Karen? I asked. Did you know that he is responsible for at least 6 divorces? I looked around and saw many shocked faces, including Karen's. I also did some research and guess what I found? I asked. The internet is full of articles about Philippe, several of which refer to you as his married American companion. We all know what this means. The photos of you and him are very revealing. I don't think I've ever seen you so happy with me. I took a couple more breaths to control my blood pressure. I made the divorce easy, I said to Karen. I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences, not adultery. I think I was more than fair. I'll leave you half of what we have in the bank. You keep your pension, and I will keep mine. The house is paid off, so it's yours to keep. All I want are my things and personal belongings. The rest is yours. I accepted a job offer in Cincinnati and will be moving there after completing my rehab. I suggest you find a lawyer to review the documents and then sign them. My lawyer's number is on the document card. Don't fight me on this, or things will get really ugly. I'll go back to the rehab center myself. You're stupid, Amy said, Aile's 81-year-old mother. You have 2 women here who love you with all their hearts. Can't you put your pride aside and let them love you? Love me? Karen literally broke my heart. Is this what you do to the one you love? Like I told Aile, a good marriage requires more than love. It requires respect, commitment, and trust. Karen showed me none of these qualities with her betrayal, and I refused to be a willing cuckold. By this point, everyone had lowered their eyes, ashamed. I decided I'd said enough, so I grabbed the truck keys that were hanging by the door and turned, preparing to leave. By the way, Happy Thanksgiving, I said before walking out. I got into the truck and took a few deep breaths before starting the engine. Once I was sure I was good to go, I looked at the house one last time. Goodbye, old friend, I said before driving away. This house had been my home for over 20 years and was the only home Karen and I had ever owned. We bought it at the beginning and spent a lot of time, effort, and money bringing it to its current state. I would miss it, but not the bad memories it now contained. I returned to the rehab center and lay in bed, tears streaming down my cheeks. I wiped my face and vowed never to cry for Karen again. This chapter of my life was now over. The next day, after breakfast, I noticed several text messages on my phone. 2 of them were from my sons, condemning me for the way I had humiliated their mother. It was a pity, I thought, they were aware of her infidelity from the very beginning. I understood that they were keeping her secret out of loyalty and a desire to please their mother, but at that moment, I was not very happy with them. Karen sent me a text asking me to call off the divorce. This won't happen, I thought. I answered with a firm no. When I returned from morning therapy, I saw a young couple standing at the door of my room. Good morning, said the young woman. I don't know if you remember me from yesterday, but I'm Simone, and this is my husband, George. I vaguely remembered them from the previous day. Can we come in and talk? She asked. Sure, why not? I said. Sorry, but yesterday was a bit of a crazy day. If I'm not mistaken, you were Aile's daughter, right? Yes, she said. It was a bit of a crazy day. I was 13 years old when I first met Aunt Karen and your 2 sons. When she and Dad went back to Albany, I asked Mom if they were cheating on each other. She said yes and that you knew about it and approved of it. I didn't quite believe it then, but I didn't say anything. Now I understand that you didn't know. No, I said. I trusted her all these years and never thought she would do something like this. I found out when your mother brought this painting into the house after your father died. It's terrible, she said. I'm so sorry for you. I'm really sorry. What's done is done, I said. I'm sorry I ruined your birthday dinner. No, it's okay, she said. He was a little reserved, though. Aunt Karen had set up a seat for you, and the empty chair was at the table. You were right about most of what you said. We all knew, and none of us did anything to stop it. But not everyone approved of it. About what? I asked. Oh, don't get me wrong, she said. I love my dad. I still do. But I know he was what you would call a ladies' man. He took what he wanted when he wanted. He loved my mother, and she loved him, so they stayed together. And yes, she also had lovers. I didn't approve of this, but there was nothing I could do. George went through something similar, and I saw how much pain it caused him. It took him a long time to recover from that. At least I didn't end up in the hospital, George said. I smiled at this. Is it true that her infidelity landed you in the hospital? Simone asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. It even has a fancy name. It's very similar to a heart attack. That's why I'm here. I'm so sorry, she said, placing her hand on my arm. I saw that she was sincerely sympathetic. It's okay, I said. They are putting me back together. When they're done, I'll go to Cincinnati. You did the right thing by divorcing your wife, George said. And I applaud you for destroying that painting. But at some point, you will have to forgive your wife so you can move on. Trust me on this. Thank you, I said. I'm not ready to do that yet. Maybe after the divorce is finalized. Karen still doesn't think she did anything wrong, Simone said. Maybe she'll change her mind, I said. Perhaps, Simone said. But I'm not going to stand by and wait for it. We talked for another half hour before they got up to leave. Please accept our invitation to visit us in Montreal someday, Simone said. Maybe for the holidays. You will always be a welcome guest. Thank you, Simone, I said. I appreciate it. Perhaps I'll come someday. George and I shook hands, and Simone kissed me on the cheek before they left. After my day of therapy and consultation, I had another visitor, Ale. She didn't look too pleased. Please, Ale, I said, if you're going to tell me that I should forgive Karen and take her back, don't waste your breath. Okay, she said. I won't. I just want you to know that she's hurting just as much as you are, perhaps even more. How can that be? I asked. I thought she had everything she wanted and a new family to boot. She cries every night, Ale said. She also has nightmares about your dead parents judging her for what she did. So she still has a conscience, I said. But it's a little late, isn't it? She loves you, Ale said. And to be honest, so do I. Why can't you let us love you and heal your heart? As I thought about her words, I had an idea. You know, it just dawned on me, I said. You don't understand what I'm going through because you've never been in a committed relationship. This is ridiculous, she said. I was married to Philippe for many years. It's true, I said, but let's admit it, neither of you was faithful to the other. Both took lovers outside of marriage. You can't understand the concept of fidelity because you've never tried it. You can't know what it's like to love someone exclusively only to have them break your heart. It would be like me trying to explain a jet engine to someone who has never seen an airplane. What do you suggest? She asked. I'm just making an observation, that's all, I said. So are you really going to get a divorce no matter what it does to your wife? She asked. Yes, I said. In the end, she gave herself to Philippe for 20 years without thinking about what it would do to me. That's not true, she said. Karen has often said that she never meant to hurt you, that she never disrespected you. And by the way, I said, Philippe did, too. Maybe not with words, but they both disrespected me with their actions and lies. So this is your final word? She asked. I nodded. Almost, I said. She turned our marriage into a mockery, humiliated me, took away my masculinity and dignity. I must restore justice. It's a shame, she said. I'm really sorry. I smiled at this. I had no doubt that Il was good in bed. She was certainly easy on the eyes. But there were principles here that she simply could not understand, and I was tired of trying to explain them to her. Perhaps sometime in the future, she began. Not until I get divorced, I said. I'm still technically married, and I am exclusively monogamous. Il kissed me before she started to leave. You didn't say no, she said, so there is hope. My rehabilitation continued as planned, and my cardiac condition improved. It helped that Karen and Il had finally decided to leave me alone for a while. About 2 weeks after that terrible Thanksgiving, I received a call from my lawyer on Monday. How are you feeling, Rob? He asked. Better, I said. I'm getting stronger. Why? Well, he began, Karen wants to meet with you one more time before she signs the papers. Is she challenging something? I asked. No, Rob, he said. She just wants to talk to you one last time. What do you think? I asked. What can it hurt? He asked. A quick meeting. You stand your ground, let her speak, then she signs. Okay, I said. Let's make this happen. Is it possible to do this here in the rehabilitation center? I don't see any reason why not, he said. I'll get a notary, and we'll close this case. We made an appointment for 2 days later in my room at the rehab center and ended the call. I made sure to inform the nurses so we wouldn't be interrupted. 2 days later, my lawyer and I were sitting in my room when Karen and her lawyer walked in. We introduced ourselves, and I turned to Karen, noticing that she looked like she had been crying a lot. How are you holding up, Karen? I asked. What do you think? She asked. I told you that I would love you for the rest of my life, but apparently that's not enough for you. You wanted this meeting, I said. So let's get down to business. She sat down and looked at me, spinning the rings on her fingers. Straight to the point, then, she said. Okay, Rob, I don't want this divorce. I want us to fix what's wrong, put it behind us, and move on. And how are you going to do this? I asked. Do you have a device that can take us back in time to the moment before we met Philippe? Can you bring yourself back, or do you think I should just ignore what you've been doing for the last 20 years? Don't be stupid, Rob, she said. I told you that I still love you and always will. Isn't that enough? No, I said. We've talked about this before. Do you think it was completely normal to cheat on me, to bring another man into our home and into our marital bed while I was at war, and to have our children lie to me the whole time? How can I trust and believe you again? You've become quite adept at lying over the past 2 decades. Rob, I promise I will never do anything like that again, she said. And should I believe you? I asked. Seriously, every time you walk out the door, I'll wonder if you're going to meet another Canadian artist. Every time you say something, I'll wonder if it's true. Do you not love me anymore? She asked. I never stopped loving you, I said. That's why your betrayal hurts so much. Believe me, it would be much easier if I hated you. I could just walk away and end it all. You just don't understand, do you? You said Philippe was a good man. Tell me, what kind of person is responsible for 6 divorces, 7 if you count ours? Explain to me, please. I want to know. I understand that you are suffering, she said, and I understand that it's my fault. But can't you put it behind you and move on? You mean pretend it never happened, right? I asked. Pretend that 20 years of lies, betrayals, and deceit never happened? Pretend you never brought another man into our bed while my life was in danger abroad? Maybe you want me to pretend that photo never existed? Is there nothing I can say or do to change your mind? She asked. I shook my head. No, I said. What you did cannot be undone. Look, this is raising my blood pressure again. Please, you've had the meeting. So sign the papers and let's end this sham of a marriage. She lowered her head, wiping away a tear. After a few minutes, she nodded. Okay, Rob, she said. You won. I will sign the documents since you are so determined to throw away more than 25 years of marriage. I didn't throw anything away, Karen, I said. You did it the first time. You slept with Philippe. Karen wiped away a tear, then took a pen and signed the documents. The notary, whom my lawyer had brought, stamped and signed the documents. My lawyer collected the documents and put them in his briefcase. I'll take it to court today, he said. You will receive the final decree in a few months. Thank you, I said. I turned to Karen. When my rehabilitation is over, I will come to pick up the rest of my things. I don't want much, just clothes, tools, and electronics. I'll call you and make arrangements. Okay, she said. Do you want my rings? I shook my head. No, I said. I gave them to you. Do with them what you want. I'm so sorry, Rob, she said. I still love you and always will. Please believe it. I nodded without saying a word. She left the room in tears. I signed documents giving my lawyer power of attorney to manage the bank accounts and other legal documents relating to the house. After about 3 weeks, I was discharged from rehab. By then, my lawyer had given me a check for half of our bank accounts. The doctors and counselors gave me my instructions, which basically boiled down to eat healthy, exercise, and keep your stress levels low. I called Kirk to let him know that I would be in Cincinnati soon, and he gave me the address of the apartment the company had given me. After calling Karen, I got in my truck, rented a small U-Haul trailer, and drove home. Karen answered after I rang the doorbell and let me in. She looked like she had aged 10 years since I last saw her. I walked in to find that she and Ale had already packed my clothes and electronics. A large TV stood next to the boxes. I checked the boxes and found that everything was neatly folded and packed. They even gave me some dishes, pots, and pans for my new apartment, and Karen packed some pictures of our kids. We wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for your new place, Karen said. I thanked her for this. I loaded everything up and was surprised when they handed me a chest of food and drinks. What is this for? I asked. I wanted you to have enough food for the trip, Karen said, tears in her eyes. I put the chest down and opened my arms to hug her. She threw herself into my arms and held me tightly, sobbing. Oh God, Rob, she cried, I am so sorry. I will always love you. I held her tightly, remembering the last time we hugged like that as husband and wife. I will always love you too, I said. It was true, even though she had hurt me greatly, I knew that I would always have feelings for her. Ale came up to us and hugged us both, crying. We stayed like this for several minutes. I broke the hug and looked at them, tears threatening to fall from my face. I'd better go, I said. Okay, Rob, Karen said. Please let us know when you get there and remember that we love you. I smiled and nodded. I'll call when I get there, I said. I left and saw them standing in the yard, waving as I drove away. I got to my new place in Cincinnati, unpacked, and returned the trailer. I called Karen and gave her the new address. She ended the call by saying that they both loved me. I settled into my new apartment and looked around. I had always loved Albany, but I was beginning to fall in love with Cincinnati. Kirk, aware of my personal situation, invited me to spend Thanksgiving with his family, and I graciously accepted the invitation. Christmas was a few weeks away, and it was the holiday I knew I would dread. Christmas had always been a special time for our family, and it felt strange and lonely not having anyone to celebrate it with. I decided to volunteer at a local homeless shelter over the holidays, thinking it would help take my mind off the loneliness. While serving food and talking to homeless families, I remembered what my grandfather once said. I felt sorry for myself because I didn't have shoes. Then I met a man who had no legs. This certainly applied here. I was surprised when I received a Christmas card from my sons, but even more surprised when I received one from Karen and Ale. It was captioned, "We both love you and miss you dearly." At first, I felt bad because I hadn't sent anything to anyone. I called my sons, who said Karen and Ale were in Montreal. I called Simone and George and spoke to them, then spoke to Karen and Ale. "We love you, Rob," they said. When I ended the call, I threw myself into the work and found it very therapeutic. I would hear from Karen periodically, and she would always end the call by saying she loved me. In mid-January, I was curious to know how their exhibition went, so I did a search. The reviews I read were somewhat mixed, with most critics calling it boring. Something told me that Ale didn't like it too much. By the end of April, I received the final decree of divorce. "Congratulations," my lawyer wrote on the sticky note. "You are a free man." Yahoo! I thought sarcastically as I opened my beer. My life consisted of work in a one-room apartment. Despite Kirk's best efforts, I wasn't ready for dating or going out often. The calls from Karen and Ale also stopped, which I really appreciated. One Thursday in mid-August, almost a year after Ale showed up on my doorstep with that portrait of Karen, I received an excited call from Kevin. "Dad," he said, "you need to go back to Albany." "Why?" I asked. "What's happened?" "This is Mom, Dad," he said. "She's in the hospital, and the doctors don't think she'll make it until the weekend." "What?" I asked. "What happened?" "She was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer a few months ago," Kevin said. "They did everything they could, but nothing helped. She asks for you, Dad. She wants to see you before she dies." I thanked him for letting me know and called Kirk, who gave me time off and said he would take care of the issues with HR. I packed a few things into the truck and drove off. When I got to the hospital, I saw Kevin and Oscar outside. They took me to their mother's room. "Thanks for coming, Dad," Oscar said. "Ale is with her, but she keeps asking for you." "You're welcome, son," I said. "What do the doctors say?" "They say she has maybe a couple of hours left, no more," Oscar said. "She's conscious now, but not for long." When we approached the room, I was shocked. The beautiful woman I saw just a year ago had disappeared. She looked tired and haggard. Her eyes were red and sunken, she had lost almost all her hair, and wore a gray turban on her head. She looked up when I entered. "Rob," she asked weakly, "is that really you? You came to me?" "Of course, Karen," I said, sitting down next to her. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding and engagement rings. She extended her hand to me, tears in her eyes. I hugged her as closely as her frail form would allow. "Oh, Rob," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I was wrong and I hurt you greatly. Can you forgive me?" I remembered what George had told me last year and realized that this was the first time she had admitted her guilt. I knew I had to forgive her, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. "See, I'm still wearing my wedding ring," she said. "I told you I would love you for the rest of my life." "I love you, Karen," I said, tears in my eyes. "And I forgive you." She started crying, and I cried with her. Ale took out a tissue and wiped her eyes. Karen took Ale's hand and placed it in mine. "Please, Rob," she begged, "promise me that you will let Ale heal your heart." I looked at Ale, who smiled and nodded. "This is fine," Karen said softly. "We're not married anymore." I nodded. "Okay," I said. "I promise." Karen smiled faintly before turning to Ale. "Please, Ale," she said, "treat my husband better than I did. Will you do this for me?" Ale wiped away a tear before answering, "I will, Karen." She said, "I promise." We all hugged and shed tears, and I could hear the boys sobbing as they watched us. "He's a monogamist and doesn't like to share," Karen said. Ale smiled and looked at me. "Maybe he'll teach me something about loyalty and devotion." Karen smiled for a few seconds, then her smile disappeared and her eyes glazed over. I heard the change in her breathing and knew she wouldn't last long. I leaned toward her ear. "It's okay, Karen," I said. "We love you." She took a few more breaths and fell silent. I looked and saw that her eyes were wide open. Alarms buzzed as the monitors showed a flat line, and the room quickly filled with medical personnel who examined her before declaring her dead. Ale, the boys, and I gathered in the corner of the room and mourned her death. Soon, her body was taken from the room. The doctor came up to us. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "I understand that Mrs. McDonald wanted her body to be donated for cancer research. The hospital will arrange all the formalities for her transfer." We thanked him and left the room, still in shock. We returned to the house where Karen and I had once lived and sat in the living room, drinking coffee. "I never thought I would return to this place again," I said. "What's happened?" I asked. "Karen got really depressed after you left," Ale said. "I did everything I could, but nothing helped. We went to Montreal for the holidays, but that didn't help either. She became immersed in the exhibition but became even more depressed when it didn't go as well as we had hoped. The only time she was happy was when she talked to you." "Was she dating someone?" I asked. Ale shook her head. "No," she said. "She refused it, although I suggested it to her several times. About a month before the final divorce, she began to get sick. I suggested she go to the doctor, but she refused. She only went when she was too sick to work. By then, it was too late. She was diagnosed with very aggressive cancer. They tried chemotherapy and radiation, but it was too late." "Damn," I said. "She should have told me something." "There was nothing you could have done, Rob," Ale said. "They talked about surgery, but by then the cancer had spread throughout her body. The only thing they could do was minimize her pain." "What about donating her body for research?" I asked. "She made this decision when she realized she didn't have much time left," Kevin said. "She discussed it with us and said this is what she wanted to do. She didn't want her death to be a burden on the family and thought it might help someone in her situation. Do you agree with this?" I asked. They nodded. "This is what she wanted," Oscar said. "I support her decision." I nodded. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked. "Karen gave the house back to you," Ale said. "She also left everything to you in her will," Ale said. "To me?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes," Ale said. "In her mind, you were still her husband, even after the divorce." She opened a drawer in the coffee table, took out an envelope, and handed it to me. "She wrote this for you shortly before she went into the hospital for the last time." I opened the envelope and pulled out a paper with Karen's handwritten note on it. "My dear Rob," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. I've had a lot of time to think about everything you said last year, and I've come to the conclusion that you were right and I was wrong about everything. First of all, I should never have opened up to Philip the way I did. I should have trusted you first, not him. But I didn't. I still don't know why, and I could never find a way to explain it in a way that you would understand or accept. I should never have brought him into our home and into our marital bed. I now understand that this was completely unacceptable. I understand the consequences of what I did to you, including your relationship with our children. And yes, they are our children. I understand that I betrayed you and broke your heart. There are no words to fully express how sorry I am for everything I've done. I promised to love you until the end of my days, and I at least held back. This is a promise. I only hope that you can find forgiveness in your heart for everything I've done. I returned the house to you and decided to donate my body to medical science. I did this for 2 reasons. First of all, I don't want my death to be a burden to you. Secondly, my hope is that they can find a cure for this cancer so that no one else suffers like I have suffered these past few months. I also want you to find love with another woman who can love you the way you deserve. Ale has very strong feelings for you, and I really hope it works out for you. I'm really tired, so I have to go. But please remember, Rob, that I truly love you with all my heart, and I'm sorry for all the pain and suffering I've caused you. Your loving wife, Karen. I folded the note and put it back in the envelope. I looked at Ale, who was wiping tears from her eyes. Have you read this? I asked her. She shook her head. No, she said. I know that she wanted to express her regret to you. She was feeling guilty for the last few months of her life. She really was serious about the 2 of us. Was she serious? I asked. She nodded. Yes, she said. She was very serious. How do you feel about this? I asked. I'd like to try it, she said. We both lost a lot. Perhaps together we can ease each other's pain. She was right. I considered the possibility of a potential relationship with Ale. She was very beautiful, and it had been about a year since I had been with a woman. I also realized that I now had the opportunity to have a night with the wife of the man who took Karen, poetic justice, perhaps. I looked at Ale before speaking. "I have one question and one condition," I said. "What is it?" she asked. "I am exclusively monogamous," I said. I had never been with a woman before Karen, and I've never been with another woman since. I'm not inclined to share. Can you live with this? She smiled and nodded. "Yes," she said. "I can totally live with it. Karen and I talked about this too. I promise that if we are together, I will remain faithful to you." "Well then," I said, "I have one condition." "What is it?" she asked. "We replaced the bed in the master bedroom," I said. In March 2020, I just finished filling out my taxes for the year and took a closer look at my finances. The last 6.5 years had been quite exciting, to say the least. After explaining the situation, Kirk was able to arrange for me to work remotely 3 weeks a month from my home in Albany. I had to spend 1 week a month at the company headquarters to work with the designers on my team. Ale kept her promise and even lived with me in my studio apartment in Cincinnati during the weeks I was supposed to be there. After what I experienced with Karen, I adopted the old rule, trust but verify. Ale understood my reasons and tried her best to gain my trust. Over the past few years, she has done much more than just love me. To heal the pain of Karen's betrayal, she has become my soulmate. Her family approved of our relationship and accepted me as Ale's companion. Even her children started calling me Papa Rob and considered my 2 sons to be their half-siblings. We spent many holidays in Montreal with our family, and they came to Albany to spend the holidays with us. They were smart enough not to mention the topic of Karen and Philip, at least in my presence. Ale not only taught me to love her but also taught me enough French to have an intelligent conversation. As I sat there looking at my finances, I remembered how I once told Karen that I wanted to retire at 60 and take her on a cruise around the world. Looking at my portfolio, I realized that I could do this now. After some analysis, I realized that I had more than enough to not only enjoy this cruise but to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I just didn't have a wife to share it with, at least not yet. I took a small box lying on my table and wondered if I was doing the right thing. How will this affect my work? Will she accept my proposal? After a while, I realized that I was overanalyzing the situation and decided to let things slide. To hell with it, I thought. It's time to stop analyzing and start living. I put the box in my pocket and grabbed a bucket with a bottle of champagne that I had bought earlier in 2 glasses. "It's showtime," I said to myself as I walked up the stairs. Ale's squeal of delight when I offered her the ring was music to my ears. "What do you think of our story today?" It seems to me that the wife did the most unpleasant thing for her husband, because to cheat right after seeing her husband off is very low. What's your impression? Write in the comments. Until new videos.